All right, so this evening we now move on to part 7 in our series, Led to Become, a series focused on the book of Judges. And this week, I'm very excited because we are moving into a story that many people know and many people have studied, and that is the story of Gideon. Yeah. I told the boys about it this evening, and they thought that was great, and Michaela started regaling me with facts of Gideon, which I thought was really cool. So the story of Gideon is interesting because it is the longest of all of the stories that are covered in the book of Judges, with the story of Deborah being very close. Deborah's took up 3 chapters. This one here is going to span 3 chapters, though it ends not with Gideon, but it ends with his son Abimelech. But we call this whole thing the story of Gideon, or some people would call it the Gideon cycle. If we kind of think about the cycles of apostasy and oppression and repentance, or not repentance, sorry, but like crying out to God, and then deliverance that the Israelites go through, those being cycles, we can kind of call this the Gideon cycle, the cycle in which they go through the same thing under Gideon, just like they did under Deborah and the rest of the judges. Throughout this whole book here of Judges, God is seeking to redirect the hearts of the Israelites, of course, back towards Him. But at the same time, the Israelites are becoming more and more like the people around them, the Canaanites. And because of that, we refer to this as the Canaanization of Israel. And so that's what we've been studying, is the fact that God's been trying to lead them and guide them into a certain echelon, and instead they have been becoming more and more like the people around them. Hey guys, you can come and grab a handout too as soon as you get those put down. This story here of Gideon starts at the end of a 40-year stretch of peace that occurred after the story of Deborah and Barak and Jael. They had a 40-year stretch of peace, and at the back of that, we then move on to this next piece in the book of Judges. Oh, would somebody, actually closest to you, why don't you go ahead and grab a microphone, Pastor, because I'm going to have you read the verses today, if you don't mind. We have a fairly hefty reading to go through over the next couple of weeks. The story of Gideon is going to take at least 3 lessons to get through, I'm going to guess. And we have a decent amount of reading to go through. So, Pastor, if you could, please read Judges chapter 6, verses 1 through 6.
The Israelites...
Oh, and I'll need to... Give me a moment, I'll have to turn you up. Okay, go ahead.
1, 2. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord handed them over to the Midians 7 years. And they oppressed Israel because of Midian. The Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people of the east came and attacked them. They encamped against them and destroyed the produce of the land, even as far as Gaza. Mm-hmm. They left nothing for Israel to eat, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For the Midianites came with their cattle and their tents like a great swarm of locusts, and their camels were without number, and they entered the land to lay waste to it. So Israel became poverty-stricken because of Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord.
All right. So what an interesting opening. So we get at the end of the 40 years of peace, now we have the Midianites coming in for 7 years and oppressing Israel. So this story starts off in a very similar way to all of the other the previous ones. Once again, the people are doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and they're sinning. And so God's handed them over to a new enemy here now, the Midianites. If you like, there's one more handout here. And so this time it's the Midianites, which are different. The last two were Canaanites, and now here we have the Midianites. Midianites are a sort of semi-nomadic people. We call them semi-nomadic because they're partially moving around and going from place to place, but they also have somewhat of some semi-permanent dwellings or some semi-permanent areas that they were living in. At this stage here, the Israelites would have no longer be considered nomadic. They were living in towns and villages full-time. But Abraham was completely nomadic because he was always in a tent going from place to place. So these people here, the Midianites, are somewhat semi-nomadic. They've been in this area for a long time, but they're also moving around quite a bit throughout the Sinai Peninsula as well as Western Arabia. According to Genesis 25, they are distant relatives of the Israelites, being descended from Abraham by his second wife, Keturah. You might remember the Kenites that we spoke about in the first couple lessons, that being the tribe from which Caleb and Othniel and etc. came from. The Kenites are a sub-tribe of the Midianites. So this is really one big family going way back multiple generations of people, but they've lived apart and lived separate, etc. for so long that they've diverged somewhat. But going back to Abraham, they were somewhat related. Yes?
You used the word that I was kind of curious what you were referring to, nomadic, I believe.
Yeah. So a nomad is simply a person who never lives in one place, but they move from one place to another place, typically looking for greener pastures to graze their livestock on, but it could be because they're merchants, it could be for other reasons, but they don't have a home or property, they just have material possessions that they take with them place to place. Yes? Say it again? Because it takes you from place to place. Fair enough. Absolutely, fair enough. Okay, so we kind of get a bit of a picture of the people here. These people, though, these Midianites, have had a negative influence on the Israelites going back to the days of Moses. It was the handing down of punishment upon an Israelite male and a Midianite female who were cavorting in their tent, actually, that brought an end to a plague that was afflicting Israel. This was that point at which the Israelites were being distracted by the things around them, and they were being distracted by the things the Midianites were doing. And they were starting to intermingle with them and worship their gods. This was during the time of Moses. And so at that stage there, God had kind of said, you need to stay away from those people. And then later on, because of the actions of the Midianites, God said that they're going to be a people that you need to conquer when you move into the land, which of course is something that they did not do. You can read that story, if you wish, in Numbers 25, if you want to go and look it up. Yes?
Are the Midianites considered to be the Mennonites?
No. No. Separate people. Yeah. Yeah, probably. Okay, now Mikhailo, for fill in the blank, which is next, could you go to the next slide for me right after that one? And what do we get there? Okay, so I'm very sorry, guys, but I did not put the fill in the blanks up on the overhead today. Slacking off. Apologize. I'm going to have to give them to you overtly. Okay, so the Midianites were crossing over the Jordan River and pillaging the Israelite settlements, taking away their livestock and grain. So boys, did you get that? The fill in the blanks are pillaging and livestock. And as the Israelites then slumped into poverty and fear, they cried out to God. And again, we see that they do not repent. It does not say that they repented. It simply says that they have cried out to God. Poverty-stricken. This phrase is interesting. It comes from a word here. The root word in Hebrew is dal, and that's not the correct pronunciation necessarily because this word isn't really pronounced, but it's dalet lamed lamed, and it really just means to become small. And really, it tells us this This tells of both their economic as well as emotional state. So that is it's a fill in the blank. I think it's a fill in the blank for you. Dal means to become small. So because I'm not sure if I have it underlined here for me to remind you that that's what it says, or if that's because it's a fill in the blank. I'm sorry, I can't tell from my notes. D-A-L-L. Yeah, or technically just D-L-L. Yeah. Okay. You want to put it in your notes? Yeah, for your notes, it's Dalit Lamed Lamed. Yep, impoverished, yep. It literally means to become small. And then figuratively, it's trying to get across the idea that you've gone from great things to lesser things. And so it tells us a little bit about their emotional state. It tells us a little bit about their economic state. And obviously with things like their grain and their livestock having been taken away, they're going to be hurt. You'll notice that in the first few verses there, it said that they would come and take their grain so that they had nothing to eat. And then they also took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys. And that's because when you're in this area here, the sheep, the ox, and the donkeys, these are not meat. These are utility animals. So the sheep are used for wool, which is used for clothing. The oxen are used to plow the fields to grow grain, and the donkeys are used to carry weight. So meat was not a consistent or common part of their diet like it is today. It was grain that was a very common part of the diet. In fact, many Jewish people in this era would eat meat maybe once a year, and that was during the sacrifice when they took that to the... this wasn't, of course, the rule for everybody, but this was common. I just wanted to point out to you that it said they had no grain, so they couldn't eat, and then their animals were taken away. And this helps us understand the sacrifice of an animal is very much so something you do out of faith and not out of surplus. Because if you go and you take, a goat, or you take a lamb of a goat or a lamb of a sheep, and sacrifice it, you're giving up on future profits, not existing profits. We're used to tithing on what we've made. So you make the money and then you tithe on it. But then they would sort of have that promise of future profits, and they would tithe on that almost. Probably makes more sense to explain that to a bunch of finance majors, but it's just an interesting thing. Yes?
Because you made a very interesting statement here just a few seconds ago that caught my attention. Kara reading, saying what the King James says.
Yeah.
And then it says here, poverty-stricken.
Yeah.
And I think that the sentence you said was, you go from something greater to lesser value.
They kind of went from being great, or that idea of, they were a great people, a mighty people, to being a lesser people. Yeah.
So I think what kind of struck me here is, even as a Christian, we can become impoverished. And
yeah, absolutely.
The multiple blessings of God that come into our lives, we can impoverish ourselves with this. The same way they did. Yeah, so we can become impoverished. And like this word is not simply talking about just their economics, it's also talking about their state of mind, state of being, and also their spiritual state. We can translate that directly into the Christian walk today. It doesn't necessarily need to be about money, but when we are out of the will of God, when we are feeding our flesh, when we're chasing after the things around us, when we are being Canaanized or walking after the flesh, as Paul puts it, we are stepping out of those blessings of God. Right. And so the things of life will come in and take away from us the things that God has been trying to bless us with. Right. And that can be mental, emotional, physical, relational, etc. Yes?
Do you think the act of the Midianites taking their livestock and things that they utilize to give them more quality of life would have led them to a place of maybe more lower estate because they didn't function as well as?
Absolutely. I believe so, yeah. A lower state of being, a lower state of self-value and self-worth. Absolutely. I mean, that can go on and on and on, which is one of the reasons I like this word so much, is that it is pretty broad. And if you look at the way that this is translated in many other translations, you'll see a whole bunch of different ways of trying to get across the same idea. And poverty-stricken is good, because with poverty comes a lot of other negative outcomes as well. If you kind of look at people who are sort of on the poverty scale, and you look at what's going on in their lives and how they feel and what they struggle with, it's a lot more than just, where's my next meal going to come from? But there is that state of, social injustice. There's that state of like lower status, lower on the status scale, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. And those were the type of people, the poor, that God has set up. We are to take care of and help and bring up out of that state. Like, if you look right through the Ten Commandments and then the whole law, so much of it was about caring for your brother. And we just talked about Ruth and the gleaning of the corners of the field, for example. That was there for the poverty-stricken. And so the whole point of the law is that God will bless his people so that his people will also be able to mimic that blessing by bringing people up out of poverty as well, or helping them, right? And not oppressing them. But in here, the whole state of Israel is now pushed into a state of poverty and oppression from the outside. But it's coming in as a result of their sin, and coming in as a result of their stepping outside of the covenant.
Which is interesting, because when you think about that segment of society, okay, so, and in here, this poverty thing here, their whole being, their whole frame of mind, the whole mentality, their mental health, everything is impoverished.
Yeah.
You feel like you are without, you're not.
Exactly. And I think that what we're going to see in the conversation that we're about to witness here is an example of what happens to those people and where they think and where they come from as we get into the conversation that we're about to see here with Gideon. Midian, Gideon. That's going to be tough. Okay, let's go ahead and read Judges chapter 6, verses 7 to 10.
When the Israelites cried out to him because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to them. The Lord sent a prophet to them. He said to them, that's a good line, I like that.
He sent a prophet.
This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I brought you out of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. I rescued you from the power of Egypt and the power of all who oppressed you. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites, whose land you live in, but you did not obey me. The angel of the Lord came.
Oh, that's good. Wait, stop. Just going to stop at 10. You did not obey me. So we'll go back to verse 10. So God sends a prophet out to in response to their cry. So they cried out to him again. They didn't repent. They simply cried out of their oppression. You can think of yourself, for example, in various situations, where difficult things are going on, maybe imminent danger, a car's coming the wrong way down the road, etc. And you just cry out to God, Jesus! You're not repenting in that moment, right? You're not going to stop and say, God, forgive me, I've sinned, here's the things I've done, etc. Now, can you please save me from this oncoming traffic? You just cry out to God. So that's part of what they were doing. That being said, they're crying out to God finally after increasing doom. So it's not impending doom, but it's like God has been trying to get their attention now for 7 years, and they finally cry out to God. So they finally admitted, we need help. We are poverty-stricken. And of course, he sends his messenger. Again, this word prophet, Malach Yahweh, messenger of God, to come and to speak to the people on God's behalf. And he says, I'm God, I have brought you out of Egypt. I've done these things, etc., etc. I'm driving out the Midianites, giving you the land. But no, you had other ideas, and you would not obey me. So that's his response to their cry. To say, listen, guys, you're crying. What did we just talk about? Remember the whole Deborah thing? Right. JL, the whole 10,000 guys and 900 chariots of iron, Egypt. You remember all these things? Right. You're not obeying. You're not listening. Right. So he explains this to them. But I love how he explains, I brought you up out of Egypt. He's proclaiming God's love and the actions that God has taken for the Israelites. This is what I have done for you because I love you, not because you've earned it. Right. And I would give you this whole land, but you would not obey. You would not obey, so you've chosen not to do this. Again, I think this is a fill in the blank. He also reminds them that because they have not completely taken the land as they were supposed to, that this is the land of the Amorites and that they are simply living in it. So they had not completely taken the land, which I thought was interesting. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. Like here we are in Judges. We've already had the crossing of the Jordan. We've had the destruction of Jericho. We've had the conquering of tons of Canaanite cities. And yet here we are in Gideon after the Israelites have lived in the promised land for hundreds of years. And he says, this is the land of the Amorites. You are living in their land. You still haven't taken the land. You're there. You're kind of there, but you've not embraced it. It's not yours. You're living a lie. You think you own this land. You don't. And if you look at it, it said that they had, because of the Midianites, this is in verse 2, the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, the caves, and the strongholds. That's not the actions of a people who own and conquer the land. That's an action of people who are dwelling in the land of the Amorites, right? Very small thinking. That's poverty thinking, poverty-stricken thinking. So this is a reminder to the people that they do not deserve God's mercy or salvation, even though they were given it. And also it's a reminder to them that they're not staying true to the covenant that God made with them. And so because of that, God has not given them the land. Okay, we are now going to read Judges chapter 6, verse 11 to 14.
The angel of the Lord came, and he sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash, the Abiezrite. His son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress in order to hide from the Midians. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior." And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? And where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" They said, "Has the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us, handed us over to Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength that you have and deliver Israel from the grasp of Midian. I am sending you." Gideon is...
That's it. I am sending you. You want us to keep going. Isn't it? Hey, valiant warrior. Speak faith into him. Yeah, convince him. Cast a vision. Yeah, totally. Totally. Now, you guys heard that and the way it was read. And when we read this, this is how we would read it, right? "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened?" Let me read this to you in the way that I feel that Gideon said it. Ready? "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, Why has all this happened? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about? They said, hasn't the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord's abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. That's how I feel he's responding here. He's cynical. He's sarcastic. When you think about it, yeah. Where is Gideon, right? Gideon is threshing wheat at the winepress. Now, this is where we get to draw on some of our learnings from the book of Ruth. Where do you thresh grain? Right? At the threshing floor. Where's the threshing floor? It's in a breezy place because you need some wind. Typically at the top of a hill or some place that's going to get a consistent breeze. You don't want to be like, maybe it's breezy, maybe it's not. You want to know that when you're threshing that wheat, that it's going to be breezy. Because again, this is how they did it. The grain would be out there, and they'd either have the animals walk on it, or they'd be smacking it with a stick. And then when the breeze came, they'd throw it in the air, and the wind would drive away the chaff, and then all the good wheat falls down to the ground. High tech. You need a good stiff breeze and a consistent one. You don't get that exactly. You don't get that at the wine press. The wine press is not in a breezy place. You don't want it in a cold place or anything like that. You want it in a place where it's going to be comfortable for you to be for a while you're pressing out the grapes. So, it definitely wasn't OSHA approved. That is for sure. It wasn't OSHA or PETA or any of those things approved. Yeah, no, definitely wouldn't have been food grade at all. And so that's where this guy is. And while he's there at the winepress threshing, because he's hiding, like Pastor said, this angel of the Lord, or again, Malach Yahweh, this messenger of God, shows up and says, "Oh, valiant warrior." So if you're a bit cynical, or if you're feeling a little bit self-conscious about the fact that you're hiding with your threshing, you're not going to respond back to this person who is standing in front of you and saying, "Look at you, high and mighty, valiant warrior, hiding here at the wine press, smacking your grain." Now, why is he hiding? Because if he's going to be out there threshing the grain at the threshing floor, that's what the Midianites would be looking for. They're waiting for you to thresh the grain. They don't want to go and steal the grain before it's been threshed. Why would they do that? They'll show up later after you've threshed the grain and be like, "Thank you very much. I'll be taking that. Looks great. Glad you've done all this work. Pleasure doing business with you. And maybe I'll take a cow or something." So he's hiding to make sure that they don't come and steal his grain. Okay, and so here, and yet this man is now being formally called into God's service. Gideon is an interesting name. It means hacker or hewer, or even, as the Halot translates it, mutilated. Yeah, so hacked or hewn or mutilated. So, and in fact, some scholars believe that this could have been his nickname, not his real full name. And so that he was named after the fact that either he was missing like a tooth, or not a tooth, like a finger or a hand or something. He could have been missing a tooth. Fair play. But I mean, like missing a limb or an ear or an eye, or because he was mutilated. Or he could have gotten this nickname because of some of the actions he's about to go through and do. Hacker, hewer. He's going to do some hewing soon. So, okay, there you go. There's the joke for the week. All the latter, yeah. So, fill in the blanks here. Could have been missing a tooth as well. Fill in the blanks. Threshing the grain at the wine press would have made the task more difficult. It would have been hard. So threshing grain at the wine press would have made the task more difficult. It's not made for threshing grain around there. It's not enough wind. When you see God's messenger appear here again, or the angel of the Lord, again, please don't think of glowing, feathery, begowned, winged creatures. This is not what this is. It's a messenger of God. This exact same term is used of the prophets of God or what you might call a theophany of God, a visual representation of him in some way, shape, or form. But it is not the Book of Revelation's cherubim, okay, or Book of Daniel cherubim. This is an individual, a person, and that will become very apparent as we move on.
That would actually line up with.
Sorry, yeah, my brain just clicked out for a second. What's going on over there? Sorry, guys, you can't see any of that. Okay, so the messenger here greets him with what might be called, at least to Gideon, a provocative statement, right? Oh, valiant warrior. And his reply can be read as sarcastic and cynical response. So this is a fill in the blank. Gideon's reply can be read as a sarcastic and cynical response to what he may have interpreted as a sarcastic greeting. Could have been that he felt that his greeting was sarcastic, the greeting of the messenger of the Lord, and so his response was cynical. So, response, greeting. So if God is so strong, why did he abandon us here? And so Gideon is correct. If God is so strong, why did he abandon us here? It's a good question. But he fails to acknowledge the reason that God abandoned Israel. Because Israel abandoned God. That's why. So they abandoned him. He was with them for 40 years of peace. 40 years. And trust me, they weren't acting all, nice and prim and proper in a Sunday go to meeting during that time. They were walking away from him. And then at the end of it, he's like, okay, that's the way you guys want to do it? Here you go. 7 years of oppression. So think of that. All these years of oppression have all been smaller than the years of peace because God is trying to win back his people, but they're still not listening. And he doesn't acknowledge those actions. So the response to Gideon is great. Go in the strength you have, is what the messenger said. Go in the strength that you have. You have might. You are strong. Just as a human being, as an individual. It could be a reference to that. This could be a reference to the strength that God is giving him. Technically, I don't feel it is. I think this is saying, you must be sick of the fact that these Midianites are taking all your stuff. Here you are, threshing out your grain on the winepress. Flex a little bit. You've got some strength. You're a man of means. And he said, do something about it. And I'll be there with you. Go in the strength you have. And I like that. Okay, we're going to read one verse now. Chapter 6 and verse 15.
And the angel of the Lord came and he sat under the oak. No, that was a different one. Okay. The Lord turned to him and said, and he said to him.
It's like when you're reading the Bible and you're skipping verse to verse to verse to verse. And the Lord said, what is it?
And he said to him.
Oh, wrong version. Sorry.
And he said to him, please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Look, my family is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's family. All kinds of excuses.
All kinds. Yeah, all kinds of excuses. Again, this can be part of that cynical, sarcastic response, like me? You want me to go? The smallest tribe? Right. And from the smallest family of the smallest tribe? And I'm the youngest of the smallest family of the smallest tribe? Love that. Yeah, so it could be all these excuses. It could be all these like, you want me? You calling me Mr. Valiant Warrior over here? Where are you getting your facts from, buddy? What have you been reading or listening to around the water cooler? But keep this in mind, he's actually not a poor man. And we won't actually discover why until we get to the next, really understand why until we get to next week, but we'll get part of it this week. Fill in the blank here. We might wonder why Gideon is responding this way to God's messenger. God's messenger. I mean, to be honest, if you think about it, and God's messenger showed up to you, are you going to treat him this way sarcastically and cynically and be like, me? Me? You want me to go and do that? Are you kidding? Like,
might be responding to the valiant, his response to the valiant warrior piece. That's not me.
yeah.
Who are you talking to here?
Exactly. Totally. He's totally could be responding to that. I believe that the reason why he's responding this way, it's because he does not believe that this person is God's messenger. And this right here is another kind of hint for us to see that God's messenger is not a white-robed, feathered creature. Because if you've seen that, it'd be a dead giveaway, right? You get this glowing, feathered creature with the halo and the harp and, kind of like, the big sash here that says God's messenger. It's a big dead giveaway, right? Gideon doesn't believe he's talking to God's messenger. He just thinks he's talking to somebody. Maybe someone who thinks they're a prophet. There were a lot of prophets and priests and different things around the time. But he doesn't believe that this person is speaking for God.
It's like in Hebrews, it goes on and said, I think it's first chapter of Hebrews, it says that God spake in times past in all kinds of different ways to his people.
Yes, exactly, in all kinds of different ways to his people. It wasn't always the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, finger of hand, writing on tables, etc. It was many, many other ways in which he worked and moved and witnessed to his people. And sometimes it was Midianites coming over the hill. Okay, it is because he does not believe that is who it is. We might wonder why Gideon is responding this way to God's messenger. It's because he does not believe that is who it is. So he brings up his status here, but God, of course, does not need high status or affluence in order to use somebody. He doesn't even need them to be a child of God, as we would call it, to use somebody for his purpose. He will use whatever and whomever for his purpose. I mean, if he can use later on, and borrowing from the future, jawbone of a donkey, then he can definitely use Gideon from Manasseh, from the smallest family, even though he's the youngest guy in the family. He can use him. Because again, it has nothing to do with us, everything to do with God. So God's messenger responds in a very similar way to the way that God spoke to Moses when calling him at the burning bush. I will be with you, is what he says. I will be with you. God is reassuring Gideon of his presence and of his assured victory, that you will get victory. I will be with you. Just go with your strength.
This almost sounds the same as when we were just talking about Deborah and the other fellow that was along. He just
Barak. Yep. He couldn't go. He said, I'll go if you go. She said, fair play, I'll come with you, but you're not going to get the winning blow now. It's going to be a Canaanite woman, not a strong Jewish man.
And God went to him.
And God went, and God was with him, and he brought out victory. And he still made this way that nobody could have imagined at the time. Nobody could have imagined. That's one of the great things we see about this book. Man, if we finish reading this book, next time you sing that song, if you can use anything, Lord, you can use me. Here's all the things that he's used. And he's used a lot of things.
On the other hand, too, Joshua, because just going back to how he responded, we have to be careful in ourselves and how we respond to that person who is delivering the word of God to us. If we are carnally minded, we will miss out on what God really wants to work out within our lives.
Even when God is looking at you right in the face and telling you right to the face, I am with you, we can miss it. Gideon is missing it. Okay, let's read Judges 6, 17 to 9. Judges chapter 6, verse 17 to verse 19.
Then he said to him, if I have found favor with you, give me a sign that you are speaking with me. So Gideon went and prepared a young goat, unleavened bread from a half bushel of flour. He placed the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot. He brought them out and offered them to him under the oak.
Perfect. There was one verse in there we missed, and he said, please do not leave this place until I return to you. Let me bring my gift and set it before you. And he said, I will stay until you return. So Gideon is saying, I want a sign. If I found favor with you, give me a sign that you are speaking with me. Give me a sign that you are who you say you are, who you proclaim you are, that you are the messenger of God. And he says, stay here under this tree, and I'll be right back. And then he goes and makes dinner. I love that, right? Stay here, wait a second. And he goes back, slays a goat, cooks a goat, makes soup, makes cakes, bread, and then brings it back. Okay, this is half a bushel of flour. That's approximately, I kind of worked this out to what it is, about 25 pounds. Or about, I think it was about 11 kilos. You guys, if you were here and had the bread that I made on Sunday, each of those loaves was a kilo of flour. Just under a kilo of flour. So 12 of those loaves of bread is what he made, right? Now, obviously, it took me longer to make them than, because he didn't leaven them, and I did. That's a lot of work, though. I mean, that's a lot of fire you got to build. And this poor guy was waiting under that oak tree for a long time. Yeah, slaying the goat. You got to find the goat, you got to slay the goat, and then you got to peel the goat, and you got to take the insides of the goat out, and you got to cut the goat, and then you got to roast the goat. Like, what a deal, hey? That being said, Gideon is also investing into this. Okay, what is he doing? He's bringing an offering. This is what, he doesn't have, he knows some things from his ancestors, but he doesn't necessarily know everything. He's not bringing together a perfect offering, like a sacrificial offering, as described in the Torah. He's bringing something a bit more akin to what you would bring Baal, or what you would bring to any of the other gods around there. He's putting together an offering for the gods. Ancient peoples here, they thought they fed their gods by bringing them dead goats and stuff. And that's what they thought the sacrifice was feeding them, the ancient peoples around them. And so that's what this guy was doing. He said, okay, if this is really the messenger of God, I need to bring an offering and put that down. And the cool part about that is if he accepts the offering, then at least I can have some faith in that. And I just love what happens here. So he wants him to go and get that offering. Interesting, though, when Moses was called to the burning bush, he expressed his worry that his brethren might not believe him. And so God gave him a sign. Put your hand in here, drop the stick, snake, leprosy, stick, not leprosy. Do those things, it'll freak them out. They'll realize it's me. And he says, fair play. Do you guys like my little Josh version of yeah. But he didn't say, okay, burning bush, big deal. I mean, it's the desert. Bushes are burning all the time. Okay, it's not burning up, but still, could be anything, right? There could be a little bit of propane underneath there. So give me another sign, God, that you are who you say you are, right? He didn't do that. He just said, I'm here, I believe. I don't know that they will when I show up. I'm this stuttering old man. I mean, he was an old man by then, by today's definition, Moses. I'm just some stuttering old man that grew up in Pharaoh's house, and they're not going to believe me. And God says, here's some signs. Gideon's like, sign, please. Don't trust you are who you say you are. You're just some guy walking around in a fur coat. Like, I don't know. Valiant warrior conversation. Give me a sign. And he says, sure. He says, okay, I'll be right back. Stay here. And he takes off. Goats, broth, bread, shows back up again, right? He didn't just whip around to save on foods. He put in some effort here. So fill in the blank time. Gideon asks for signs right away. Asking God to prove to him that he would do what he said he would do. He still does not trust this messenger. So the fill in the blanks are signs and trust. The size of this offering, though, is quite large. We've got 25 pounds of flour. We've got a pot of broth, probably made from the goat, and we have a whole goat. This is a lot of food. This is a feast, really, right? This is a feast. feast. This is why sacrifice time was also feasting time for the Israelites, because you'd be, lamb and grain offering, and this is snacks. This is communal. This is being together. And there's a reason why all of that sacrificing and that eating together and feasting and all that stuff is connected with communion later on. And as often as you do this in remembrance of me. And every time we get together on Sundays and we're eating together, we're continuing that same tradition. But I digress. Let's read now. Next, Judges chapter 6, verse 20 to 23.
And the angel of the Lord said to him, take the meat with the unleavened bread and put it on this stone and pour the broth on it. So he did that. The angel of the Lord extended the tip of the staff that was on his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire came up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. When Gideon realized he was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Oh no, Lord God, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace to you. Don't be afraid, for you will not die."
So I love how Gideon shows back up here after this guy's been waiting underneath the oak tree for a long time. And as soon as he shows up, the angel of the Lord takes control. It's not Gideon, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. The angel of the Lord takes control right away. He knows he's bringing an offering and what he's doing. So he says, take it, put it on that rock. Put the goat on it, on the rock. Put all the bread on the rock, and then dump the soup on it. What do you end up with? Yes. Soggy bread. Does anybody else put crackers in their soup? I love doing that. Big fan. And they get soggy, okay? So you got this goat meat, this soggy bread all over it. It's a mess. Okay, you try and set that alight on a rock. There's no wood. There is a rock. There is cooked goat. There is soggy bread and broth and water everywhere. No kindling, no propane, no torch, no nothing. You've got one stick. Exactly. You've got one stick, and that is the staff of the angel. And he touches it, and fire. That's got to make Gideon go, wow. And then, angel's gone. So there wasn't a like, okay, fair play, you're the angel of God. More details, please. What's going to happen next? No, none of that. He could have asked us questions. He could have leaned into it before. But instead, he says, give me a sign. And so all he gets is a sign. No more direction, just a sign. Woof. Go. Yes. Not just a regular stick. Apparently not. Or it could have been a regular stick and just an irregular God. Very powerful God. And so there was no question that this sacrifice had been accepted. It was taken. And then instantly he says, oh no, Lord God, I have seen the Lord's angel face to face, or I've seen the Lord's messenger face to face. So as soon as he sees this happen, here's your fill in the blank, Gideon interprets the messenger's actions immediately. I have seen the angel of the Lord, he says. He finally realizes what has been in front of his face the whole time. So your fill in the blank there is messengers and realizes. Just all of this, he goes from sarcasm and distrust and cynicism to fear. When none of those are things that God wanted him to feel. Fear. He shows up and wants him to feel strong and powerful and of faith. He says, you valiant warrior. And Gideon has his own things going on. It's probably just the oppression.
Yeah, I think it's also probably because look at the words that he said. What came out of his mouth is what was in his heart. He said, "Where, we've heard of all this stuff. Where are you?
Yeah.
We've heard
Our ancestors tell us about.
We've heard."
Yeah.
So it could have been brought on by, because the people you do associate with and what you hear and what
Yeah.
being talked about.
Yep.
You can become cynical. You can become judgmental.
Yep.
You can become all kinds of things, which is exactly what happened to him.
Yeah. And we will see in the next week, we will see that Gideon does not live in a God-fearing town. So the place he is at is not one that is looking for God to come around. And he's not a God-fearing town.
Which is a good thing, Josh, because when you think about it, if he came into that place, it was not a God-fearing town. And with the mentality that was going on, God said, I'm going to step into this place.
And I'm still going to use it. And I'm still going to use you.
Yes.
No matter how cynical. But then he goes, the crazy thing, of course, is now he goes from that to fear. He doesn't go from that to strength and power, and now what this messenger has said to me is true. I am this valiant warrior. He's going to go and give me strength, and I'm going to conquer. He goes instantly to, I've just seen God, and I'm now going to die. Which, yeah, it's just absolutely amazing. And of course, he might be citing some of this again from the way that the ancestors spoke about him, because in Exodus 33 and 20 it says, and he said, thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live.
Right, yeah.
This is God speaking to Moses. And yet God speaks here to Gideon through his messenger. Okay, last verse, and to wrap it up, Judges 6 and 24.
So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, the Lord is peace. This is a good thing to build. It is still in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. That's a hard word.
Abiezrites, yeah.
Abiezrites.
Today, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I don't think I pronounced it any better, yeah.
That's better than mine.
So undoubtedly, Gideon probably used that same stone, I would,
Yeah.
as part of the altar.
Right.
Just throwing it out there is probably an idea. He probably used it right there and said, this, the Lord is... Why would he do that? Because he just seen the face of God, and he's afraid, and then God spoke to him and said, you will not die. So he calls this, and in Hebrew it would be called Yahweh Shalom. That's what he calls this place. The Lord is peace. Yahweh is peace here. And again, something so strong and powerful like that, again, is invoking the then name of God, Yahweh is peace, is juxtaposed against all of the other gods around them, including the altar to Baal just down the street. Literally just down the street. So here, fill in the blanks, Gideon finally accepts the calling of God. He accepts that he has heard from God, and he is now willing to follow him. So he accepts the calling of God. And so in this end, of course, it says it is still there in Ophrah of the Abiezrites today. This footnote here, this would have allowed the reader of the time to literally go and fact check this. So when you see that sort of thing that says unto this day, that was as of the writing, obviously. I have no idea if that stone is literally still there or not. No one knows where it is. And we have an idea of where Ophrah may have been, but it's now a city in that area. So who knows where that stone could be. But at the time, when this was written and passed around and people read it, they could have gone to that town and found the stone and gone to Yahweh Shalom and said, this is where it is and this is where it happened. And so that's why these footnotes are there. And we see these kinds of footnotes throughout the Old Testament. So, in summary, this story starts off with us finding out that Israel has yet slipped into apostasy yet again. They call out to God, and then God responds. And he responds by sending a prophet to go and tell them, this is not what I want for you. I have plans for you, but you are disobeying me. Gideon, of course, is not a willing vessel of faith, but God intends to use him anyway. And this just tells me that God's will is supreme and that he will work through any methods he wants to achieve his will. Anything that he wants. And so we should never judge others saying, oh, God could never use that person, right? They're too carnal, or they're too this, or they're too that. God can use anything. So we shouldn't do that. Don't step out and even if you know some preacher or some pastor who's speaking to you has had some things in life and some mistakes, and we're all flesh. God can use all of it. And so be careful what you shut down. At the same time, don't be so quick to judge yourself. Oh, God could never use me. Hey, if he's using Gideon and he's using all these other people that we've already read about, he can use you as well. If he can use a wandering a mercenary, he can use you. If he can use the youngest person from the least family of the least tribe of Israel, like Gideon, and call him, appear before him, and talk to him face to face, he can talk to you, and he can lead, and he can guide you.
I think it's a good little, just by looking at it, just here, just now, especially when, God called him, and our last little thing, he finally accepts God's call. I think this is the thing that a lot of times men or women that God calls for a specific purpose, they wrestle with this because they see their inadequacies.
Yep.
But we have to remember, it is not about might nor by our power.
Yeah.
But it is by God's Spirit, because this work can never be done.
Absolutely.
By us, and it's been started in the Spirit.
It will finish there. It's never going to be made perfect in the flesh. And ultimately, God's calling is not for us. So if God calls you, it's not for you, or maybe I should say just for you. It's not about you, for sure. It's about others. It's always about others. So it doesn't matter Gideon's prestige or lack of prestige. It is irrelevant. Because if he's going to use Gideon to free his people from the oppression of the Midianites, then this calling isn't about Gideon. It's about the Israelites. So it doesn't matter his status and his power and his charm and his wit. It doesn't matter anything. God will use what he wants to save his people. It's not about Gideon, it's about the people.
The being used of God, though, is not the salvation of God. That doesn't
Exactly. Being used of God and salvation of God are two separate things. Absolutely. Very, very good point. Because God will use anything. I mean, he will use a donkey to speak to a prophet, and that donkey's not going to heaven. So,
Wasn't it who Caleb that they didn't come from? It was a tribe that wasn't of the people.
it wasn't of the people of Israel. Yes. They were Kenites. And yet he used them. But in that case there, I mean, they joined. Caleb was a proselyte. He joined and loved God. In fact, he was a better lover of God than most of the people around at the time. But yeah, he will use who he wills. But being used of God and being saved by God or having salvation are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. There's been a lot of people who have been used by God to win others to God who have never given themselves to God at all. And so there's a lot of stories like that. So being used of God and salvation are not the same thing. They're just not. Not everyone who preaches at a pulpit that is in front of people who are saved is going to heaven. There's nothing there that is equal. Salvation is a personal thing between you and God. And we can't look at somebody and say, you're saved, you're not saved. God understands what that's going to look like at the end of time. Obviously, we're given some things, but really, salvation is you work out your own salvation, and we work that out with God. But being used by God is not the same thing. Being used by God is for the blessing of others, and not for ourselves. Even, for example, when God called Abraham, he didn't call Abraham and say, I'm calling you out because you are this, and you're that, and you're amazing, and so on and so forth, and kind of give... No, he said, through you, all the families of the world will be blessed. I don't care that you're a nomad. I don't care that you don't have, a huge city to your name and are coming from a populous nation, etc., etc. I'm going to use you, and I'm going to bless the world through you.
Can the being used of God in those circumstances lead to a place of salvation?
Absolutely. And God is working with people to take them to salvation in so many ways and in so many times. But often that is a lot more private than a public calling. Yes.
That's a personal thing compared to you're doing this out here, but it's this here.
The relationship.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Joshua, because this is a very good discussion. Let me say that in growing up in the church in Nanaimo, there was a gentleman there that was responsible for winning many of the men that went out and started churches on Vancouver Island, but he himself was not saved.
Yeah.
He went to church, and that's what happens at times. There are people inside the church that God will use to gather, but they themselves just can't seem to get a hold of it
Yep.
and end up, unfortunately, losing out in a terrible way with God.
Yeah.
But God used them to reach these men that made a difference in other cities, and I could tell you the guy's name
Yeah, absolutely.
because I knew.
It's a very common thing, and it's the most important thing for us to take away from this is it's not for us to judge. Do not judge your own adequacies or inadequacies. You're a bad judge of those things. God's a great judge of those things. Leave it to him. Don't judge the adequacies or inadequacies of others, particularly leadership. That's not your role. That's God's role. Let him do that. But when the messenger of God is standing in front of you, listen. Listen.
You know how you tell when someone's listening?
When they take action.
Bingo.
Exactly. Absolutely. When they act on what they have learned. Yes.
Something I just kind of saw, and I know that, we're focusing in on that it's the whole purpose and the plan here is just the salvation of others, right?
Yeah.
And, but it's interesting to me how Gideon, like, if I have found grace in my sight, and he's going and preparing and spending this time and energy to prepare an offering, that I think, I don't know, the takeaway I thought was, okay, well, he had this reaction to begin with when he first saw this kind of off the cuff, like, but God knows what's in a person. God knows the heart.
Yeah.
And what's really going on.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't have responded that way by taking action and going, I need to know if this is really God.
Yeah.
I gotta have,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yep. Yep.
I'm gonna do this.
I agree. And I think what we can take from that is that there are layers to personality and layers to people. And sometimes we protect ourselves with that cynical, sarcastic affront, and we're hiding the insecurity that lives deep inside, or the desire for something better, or the knowledge that God does want to do something, but we ourselves feel ourselves so inadequate, the youngest from the smallest family, the least tribe, that we just don't think we can move in that space. And perhaps that conversation with the messenger of God was able to slowly peel some of those layers off. So out of that deep yearning inside of him, he was able to go and take some action, but he still wanted the sign. So there's still insecurity there, but he still went and did it. And what he did was no small thing. He brought a huge offering. And then God took it. And when God took it, he was shocked. So absolutely, there's layers to his character here that we can see that is beyond maybe just the two-dimensional way I portrayed him as being sort of this sarcastic, cynical, grumpy old man or young man. There's something else going on in there for sure. And yes, God would have chosen him for some reason.
Now, I think this is kind of cool because we're dissecting this whole situation.
Yeah, and this is fun. This is the best part about reading the Bible, is that especially Gideon, we're going to look at him for a long time. It's not he doesn't get one verse. So we get to see more of his character. And it is fun to be able to do those sorts of things. But you can see, if we look at those layers of this of Gideon, the way we've sort of peeled them back right now, we're going to see this change and develop. and not always in the best ways as we move forward. And I would say that another person that I think would be sort of similar to this, not perfect character, but an interesting way to look at someone's character adjust and change over time is King Saul. Because of the way he was and the way he acted when he was young and the way he acted to Samuel and then how that adjusted and changed over time. It's sad, absolutely, because there's something in there that's just, but still, God reaches out to use. And God, if you can use Gideon, you can use me, if you want. If you want. Let's stand.